Okay, so we are going to get started again in the spirit of keeping us close to time. So our first speaker after the break is Gary Pickering. Gary is from Biological Sciences, his home unit, and I'll let him share with you his other 50 units that he belongs to. Come on up, Gary. We're all yours.
Thank you, Ryan.
Microphone, camera.
I'm told hearing me is the last problem that you're going to have, so I assume that the vocals are okay.
You can't wander it because it's a camera.
Are we live or something?
Yes. Yeah, you're going out to the world right there. So this is your world debut, just out to the world.
I guess I didn't get the memo.
No, I'm sorry, and you missed the introduction. So it was being recorded, and then we'll send it to you when you're done, so you can put up in your profile and so on. So yes, stay in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. I did get the memo, and it said 0 to 1 slides, unlike the 400 slides that the previous speaker, I think, inundated you with. I've gone with 0, so I'll need to, I guess, use my voice to paint a canvas about the wonderful stuff that our lab does. I think that's the purpose, isn't it? To outline what research projects and what research foci each of the faculty attached to ESRC and the SAS program are involved in. We do cool stuff. The stuff that we do is largely geared around two themes and two very simple questions. First of all, why don't we behave in the way that we ought to in regard to pro-environmental behaviour? And in particular, we've focused on climate change mitigation and to an increasing extent climate change adaptation. At the individual level, what are the psychological barriers that stop me from doing the right thing in terms of behaviours and actions that I have control over that can make a difference? It can range from everything from joining an environmental organisation, an activist group, through to whether or not I choose to take the recycling out or even do the recycling every Friday. What are the barriers? And so I don't really care, our lab doesn't care what the actual behaviours are, as long as they're behaviours that can mitigate climate change or greenhouse gas emissions. So I've done research most recently on looking at red meat consumption. Canada is one of the top 10 countries in the world for meat consumption. And one of the lousiest when it comes to our climate change mitigation protocols by almost any objective measure. So we've looked at, first of all, establishing, again, simple questions. Why do we eat red meat? You'd be surprised. So we've surveyed a couple of thousand Canadian adults, asked that question. And we've also looked at what the individual barriers may be for them to reduce red meat consumption. Growing red meat has a horrendous environmental impact. We've looked at behaviours most recently such as engaging in organic waste diversion schemes. So here in Niagara we have this thing called the Green Bin program, where household domestic wastes are put in a green bin and they're taken out and they disappear overnight. And that's good because organics, when they're disposed of incorrectly, generate bucket loads of methane evil when it comes to greenhouse gases. So we've engaged with the local Niagara region and completed a survey of 3,000 Niagara residents to try and understand why Niagara has one of the lowest uptake rates of green bin programs in the entire province. So we've measured practical things like access and belief in the efficacy of the program. We've measured socio-demographic factors. We've also focused on pro-environmental values. Things like belief in the anthropogenic origins of climate change. Now, it turns out all these things influence our likelihood to participate in the Green Bin program. So just two examples of behaviours that can make a difference at the individual level to mitigation. And there are several others. The second major foci of our group is the so what question. Knowing what the barriers are for individuals. So for instance, it could be, turns out it is the case, that Canadians compared to many other nationalities place a lot more emphasis on social norms when it comes to their decisions as to whether or not they will engage or not engage in climate change mitigation behaviour. We're more concerned about the neighbour next door and how he or she will perceive our action, as simple as do I or don't I take my green bin out, than most other nations, according to our survey results, for instance. So knowing that social norms, for instance, are a real barrier for Canadians, what can we do about that? And that's largely focused around optimising pro-environmental education, communications and messaging. And we go after that question, how do you optimise your communications, your education bits to try and persuade people to behave in the right way? We go after that mainly by using framing theory. So we look at designing educational messages that say about the benefits of recycling using different frames. So for instance, we've used social norm frames. We've given mock advertisements on the benefits of, again, we'll stick with waste diversion, and we've positioned those statements within different frames, one of which could be a social norm frame. You list a bunch of advantages of being involved in recycling, and you simply add a statement such as, more and more Canadians are now changing their behaviour to reflect these factors. And you measure to what extent including those different statements, those different frames, might change people's behavioural intent. Other frames that we have played with are place identity. So to what extent can you emphasise a global place identity or a regional place identity in terms of the examples that you give to, say, illustrate the impacts of climate change? To what extent does that influence people's beliefs towards climate change and their willingness to behave in certain ways? And we've also looked at persuasive versus empathetic versus informative frames. So when it comes to trying to influence people's beliefs on the reality of climate change and its impacts, we can, and have done this with both Australian samples and Canadian samples, we can position, for instance, a news article about a local flooding impact that's likely related to climate change. We can position or frame that information according to an empathetic focus, so we can include examples of how the flood has affected little Johnny or little Lily and caused impacts at the personal level. We can position that information in terms of persuasive language, or simply present it as informative information, and then measure people's beliefs and attitudes before receiving the message and after the message. So these are the things that we play with. Ultimately, again, asking the very simple question, what are the barriers that operate at the individual level that stop us from behaving in pro-environmental ways? And then what do you do about it? We're focused on communication for that. Who does the work? You do the work. I'm just a lazy faculty member. You provide all the actual groundwork. So we engage you in a learning experience to help collect this data, analyse this data. So typically SAS students, you folk in my lab, and about an equal mix of psychology, typically psychology honours students do this sort of work. We collaborate with, as I've given in the example, several authorities, local authorities, and several other researchers that are attached to the centre. So Drs. Drs. Vasseur, Beard, Plummer, folks that we collaborate with, as well as several colleagues at the University of Sunshine Coast in Queensland, which gives access to a very different population and warm, sunny beaches in winter. Let's not forget that. Are there any questions? That's much better than a slide, isn't it? Come on.
Questions for Dr. Pickering?